Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. I'm Jacqueline, and I'm here in Washington, D.C. with Mafalda Duarte, who leads the $8.3 billion climate investment funds. Mafalda, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Jacqueline. It's a pleasure, and happy International Women's Day for you.
Thank you.
And everyone out there.
Thank you. So before I ask Mafalda the first question, remember to invite your friends to join the conversation. Just click share so that the Q&A appears on your timeline, and include the hashtag IWD2017. So with that, Mafalda, the first question is fittingly also the title of this conversation. Does gender really matter in the fight against climate change?
The question to me is, how can it not matter? I mean, climate change is the defining issue of our life.
Very
and
true.
Tackling climate change is complex, and we need both men and women with their different talents and ideas and solutions and experiences, and have them actively engage and contribute to addressing climate change. Men and women look at issues differently.
Very true.
They focus on different things. They make decisions differently. And I speak from my own experience as a woman, as a professional in development and climate change, but also as a daughter, a wife, and a mother of 3 girls. So that difference matters, but for that difference to matter, both men and women need to be equally empowered and contribute to the solutions. And the problem is that they are not. We see that women have less access to resources, to assets. Their voice is not being heard and considered where it needs to, and they are not engaged in decision-making processes where they need to be engaged. And so if you think about it, we are more than 50% of the world's population.
And certainly it's been said that we hold up half the sky. Good point.
Certainly, and we live longer. And yet, you know, we continue to see in business, in work, in education, us being overlooked. So it's important that we recognize that these current gender biases and the exclusion, the social exclusion of women, is in fact limiting us and not benefiting from the contribution they can make to climate change. And it's about time that we change that.
Yep. Thank you for that. That's a very interesting reframing of the question. How can gender not matter in climate change and in the fight against climate change? So my second question for you today is, the CIF works with 72 developing countries. I think you have about 300 investments in clean technologies, in energy access, sustainable forest, and climate resilience. So what is the CIF doing about gender equality or gender inclusion in the projects that you support and have invested in?
In the climate investment funds, and as you said, this is a very rich and diverse program. We are supporting 72 developing countries, very different countries in different regions of the world, different technologies, different sectors, from forestry to energy to agriculture to water management. And so we also benefit from that wealth and diversity of experiences. But we are putting gender empowerment right at the center of what we do and what we support.
And how do you do that?
We have, and we have a very clear goal. Our goal is to promote women's asset position, voice, and livelihoods. And by having them benefit from the support of CIF. How do we do that? It is important. We are looking at it from multiple perspectives. It's important to have the policies at the program level that basically give the signal of the commitment. It's a signal of the commitment to gender empowerment, and that also ensure accountability. but we are also, ensuring that there's women representation in our governance structure, and that there's representation of women in decision-making processes at the country level, at the level of deciding how resources are going to be used, how are projects going to be designed, how are they going to be implemented and monitored and evaluated, and who learns from those experiences and lessons. So, and it also means, that we want to see a lot more in terms of the investments. We want to see investments and projects where there are clear targets for women employment, where there are clear targets for women's training, where there's a clear intent to promote access to finance for women and support women enterprises, and also, making sure that women are primary beneficiaries of, for example, social protection schemes. This, I'm talking about the area of economic empowerment. Now let's go to voice empowerment, which is something that I was also speaking about earlier on. We also want to see a lot more women's engagement and participation in decision-making processes, in planning processes, in budgeting processes, at the national level, at the government level, national, regional, and local level. And we also want to see women's voices and participation in things like user associations, or associations that discuss about how resources are to be used and shared. All of this is very important. We have many examples in the climate investment funds, but our intent is to see more and more of those.
So we want to hear women, we want them to be in the process for the full project cycle. So from the beginning, throughout, and to the end.
Correct.
And that approach, I think I've heard the term used, gender smart. And so this is essentially what the SIF projects try to do, is to be gender smart throughout.
Correct, and I can give you a few examples that might make what I just said even more tangible of some examples. And I encourage all of you out there to look at our website. We have many examples, and we will continue to gather more experience and lessons.
So we've got a few questions coming in from the audience. If you share one example with us, and then we can take a question.
So let me touch on Thailand, for example, where we have supported a very strong female leader in the renewable energy sector. In 2008, Thailand had no solar energy to account for. And while the costs of the technology were coming down, and the government was putting in place incentive programs to basically support the investors that wanted to pursue solar power. Wendy, a retired manufacturing executive, saw the opportunity and decided she wanted to contribute to Thailand's economic growth, to Thailand's to prevent the level of reliance of Thailand on imported energy. But moreover, when I heard her speak about it, what compelled me very much was her message that she wanted to see a sustainable future for her grandchildren.
Wow. So she chose to come out of retirement to be the driver of that solar growth.
Imagine just how powerful that is, and how motivating that is.
Yeah.
And she faced a constraint, which was access to long-term finance. So that's where, solar energy, as I said, it was an unproven market at the time in Thailand, and the financial institutions weren't ready to provide the type of finance that was needed. That's where we came in, and with IFC, one of our implementing multilateral development bank partners, we addressed that, we tackled that. So she benefited from access to the type of finance she needed for the initial investments, and then continued from that point onwards. And 6 years later, and 250 megawatts of solar power later, she was recognized by the UN Momentum for Change Women for Results Award.
Wow.
And the story is just so powerful and speaks for itself.
So this is actually a very nice example. I've heard it said often that SIF supports first movers in a market. So one day is very much that on solar for Thailand.
An example to so many of us.
Okay, thank you. So a reminder to the audience online, you can post questions for Mafalda through comments. But in the meantime, Mafalda, I want to ask, what can ordinary people do beyond what institutions like the CIF, like the World Bank, and other big institutions are doing on climate change? What can I or the people watching do in our own lives to be part of the solution?
So I hope that by what I just said, people can relate a little bit. You know, sometimes there is a misperception that when we talk about gender and when we talk about gender and climate change, we're talking about very abstract concepts. And here what I'm trying to do and say is, here are very concrete actions that produce tangible results. If you still, if you are out there and this is not something that you can necessarily relate to or you can see yourself contributed in the same way, what I would say is just encourage all women. Encourage all women in your lives and that you come across to pursue their dreams, their ambitions, give them the opportunities to do so. Opportunities are very important. And just keep encouraging them and tell them you will face adversities. There will be risk. All of us have faced them before. But keep advocating for women's empowerment. This we can all do.
Yeah, that's true. Men and women.
Men and women.
Yep, we need allies in that effort. And because it is International Women's Day, my last question for you is, who are some of the women in development or other areas of your life that inspire you and that you admire, and why?
There's so many. I have been honored to have a mother that has been a source of inspiration for me all my life, because she never shied away from what she wanted. And so she set that example for myself. She knew that and she knows even today that she will face constraints, that she will be faced with adversities, some of them difficult, but she never gave up, and she puts her energies, she puts her efforts, her commitment in making things happen and moving from one step to the next, even up to today. So she's been a great source of inspiration for me. But I don't want to give the usual answer, and only big names out there. I'm very humbled by the many women that I work with, that I interact on a daily basis, colleagues that have become friends over the years, and that have supported me, that have been out there for me, that have given me opportunities, and that have given me a chance to return those same opportunities and the encouragement that they've offered to me. So all of them are a big source of inspiration to me. Of course, there are other big names out there, and every time I have a chance to hear Mary Robinson, for example, I go and hear her speak, and she'll be here these days again speaking about the topic that is very close to her heart, human rights, and therefore women's rights. Very inspirational female leader. 1D I just mentioned, many others, the president of Liberia, a big leader in Africa.
She was the first female president, I believe, on the continent.
Correct, and a strong believer in the importance of empowering women in development. Others in the area of climate change, we've had Rachel Kite here as our special envoy on climate change. She's now Sustainable Energy for All lead, a source of inspiration to many, but many others out there that are just a remarkable source of inspiration.
Excellent, thank you. So, we have a question. What can the private sector do to support? Does the CIF work with the private sector in its projects?
1D is a private sector entrepreneur.
Oh, there you go.
We've the example that I just mentioned in Thailand. She's a private sector entrepreneur. But we do support. We do support. I mean, and when we look at it, the examples that I was giving, I didn't mention, for example, a resilience project we have in Zambia.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where, this is a project of the World Bank that we are also providing support to, and their deliberate target of women farmers and areas that actually have a high proportion of female-headed households, some of which widows, mm-hmm. And basically providing them with the means, with the finance and the tools for them to clear the canals, and by doing so, expanding the areas where they can produce maize and cassava, and by doing so, enhancing their food security and their livelihoods. These are entrepreneurs. These are, from the small scale household level to, bigger energy companies. That's what we do. That's our footprint.
Yeah. So the climate challenge demands participation from all sectors, not just multilateral development banks like the World Bank and some of the partners the CIF works with, but also entrepreneurs on the ground and private investors at the global level.
No, absolutely. I mean, we will not respond to the challenge if, as I said in the beginning, if we are not all committed and engaged.
We have another question for you on renewable energy. Do you have any examples on countries that are scaling up renewable energy and making energy access a reality for more people?
Yes, and I maybe I touch on another example, which is also very powerful from a women's empowerment perspective, a sustainable energy development program in Maldives, okay. Where, again, what we see is, energy sector tends to be a male-dominated sector, and so efforts such as having a deliberate target on training female staff at the parastatal, that's what this project is doing. It's important, and in addition to that, also providing reduced off-peak tariffs for women that own micro and small enterprises. Mm-hmm. This is very important to stimulate these women enterprises and the economic activity and social development in these areas.
And finally, before we end our conversation, Mafalda, is there one project or a couple of projects that you are most proud of that you've worked on, either with the CIF or in other jobs?
I've worked many years in Africa, mm-hmm. as you know.
Yes, I'm wearing my proudly African dress today, especially for you.
Thank you. And, in general, I don't want to single out a project. I am extremely proud of having had the opportunity to work with the climate investment funds and right now head the funds because I just see the difference that these funds are making, how they are driving investment choices, mm-hmm. how they are piloting new business approaches, how they are doing what you were saying, supporting first-of-its-kind projects, and tackling climate at the same time. Yeah. And we see this, as I said, in the energy sector, from the very well-known concentrated solar power project or complex in Morocco and South Africa to the smaller scale supporting communities and their resilience efforts in Niger or Zambia, mm-hmm. To efforts in the forestry sector in Mexico, and again a very powerful story of women's empowerment, mm-hmm. And access to finance for women entrepreneurs in the forestry sector. So I am very proud, and I'm very eager to continue to support women's empowerment at the CIF, and learning from it and sharing those experiences and knowledge.
Yeah, knowledge matters. So, Mafalda, thank you. You've been so generous with your time.
My pleasure.
And some very inspiring examples and stories. People can post questions or comments to the chat, and we will definitely take the time to respond. Thank you for joining us, and happy International Women's Day to everyone.
Happy International Women's Day. And keep encouraging all women out there
to live their dreams. Thank you.